The forest was alive with a symphony of rustling leaves and birdsong, its towering pines casting long shadows across the sunlit trail. Caleb Davis walked cautiously along the dirt path, clutching his camera. The 12-year-old had wandered further than usual, driven by his fascination with capturing wildlife. He'd always found solace in the woods, a place where his father's long absences felt less heavy, the silence comforting rather than oppressive. He adjusted the camera strap around his neck and paused to snap a picture of a squirrel perched on a low branch. The sound of the shutter broke the forest's rhythm, and for a moment, everything seemed to still. That's when he heard it. A low growl, almost imperceptible, but unmistakably close. Caleb froze. His pulse quickened as his eyes scanned the dense underbrush. The growl came again, louder this time, accompanied by the crunch of leaves. A large, gray wolf emerged from the shadows, its amber eyes locked onto Caleb. The boy's breath caught in his throat. He knew wolves rarely attacked humans, but this one looked different. Its fur was matted, its ribs visible beneath its skin, and its movements were erratic. It was hungry. Caleb took a cautious step back, his hands trembling. The wolf mirrored his movement, lowering its head and baring its teeth. Panic surged through him as he tripped over a root and fell backward, the camera tumbling from his grasp. The wolf advanced, its growls rumbling like distant thunder. Caleb scrambled to his feet, but his legs felt like lead. He thought of his father, an FBI agent who'd always taught him to stay calm in emergencies. But no lesson could have prepared him for this. Out of nowhere, a voice cut through the tension. "Hey, over here." Caleb turned to see a tall, muscular man sprinting toward him. Dressed in a gray hoodie and cargo pants, the man moved with purpose, his steps precise and deliberate. His piercing blue eyes locked onto the wolf, his face a mask of calm determination. The wolf hesitated, its attention now split between the boy and the newcomer. The man slowed his approach, raising his hands to appear non-threatening. "Stay still," he murmured to Caleb, his voice steady and authoritative. Without warning, the wolf lunged. The man reacted instantly, stepping between Caleb and the animal. He grabbed a fallen branch and swung it in a calculated arc, driving the wolf back. The creature snarled, its claws scrabbling against the dirt, but the man stood his ground. Using techniques honed during years of combat training, the man maneuvered the wolf away from Caleb, his movements fluid and precise. He didn't attack recklessly. Every step, every strike was measured, aimed at neutralizing the threat without escalating it. After what felt like an eternity, the wolf retreated, retreating into the shadows with one last guttural growl. The forest fell silent again, save for Caleb's ragged breathing. The man turned to Caleb, his expression softening. "You okay, kid?" Caleb nodded shakily, his wide eyes fixed on his rescuer. "Why, yeah, I think so. Who are you?" "Ethan," the man replied, offering a hand to help Caleb up. "Just a guy out for a jog." Caleb accepted the hand, his legs still wobbly. "That was amazing. You saved me." Ethan gave a modest shrug, his gaze scanning the forest for any lingering danger. "You were lucky I was nearby. What are you doing out here alone?" Caleb hesitated, then admitted, "I wanted to take pictures. My dad doesn't know I'm here." Ethan's brow furrowed, but he didn't press further. Instead, he picked up Caleb's camera and handed it back to him. "You've got guts, kid. But next time, stick to the safer trails. The woods aren't always friendly." Caleb managed a small smile, clutching the camera to his chest. "I will. Thank you, Ethan." The two stood in silence for a moment, the gravity of what had just happened settling between them. Ethan glanced at Caleb, noting the boy's resilience despite the fear etched on his face. "Come on," Ethan said, gesturing toward the trailhead. "Let's get you back to your dad." As they began walking, the forest seemed less ominous, the danger receding like a distant storm. Caleb couldn't help but steal glances at Ethan, wondering who this man was and what had driven him to act so selflessly. Little did they know, this chance encounter was only the beginning of a story that would change both their lives forever. Caleb sat quietly in the passenger seat of Ethan's truck, still clutching his camera as they drove toward the town's edge. The adrenaline from the encounter had faded, replaced by a heavy exhaustion. Ethan glanced at him occasionally, his own mind swirling with thoughts. Who was this boy, and where was his family? Your dad's going to be worried, Ethan said, breaking the silence. Caleb hesitated, fiddling with the camera strap. He's probably at work. He's always working. Ethan raised an eyebrow. What does he do? He's an FBI agent, Caleb replied, his voice tinged with a mix of pride and frustration. He's gone a lot, but he says it's to keep people safe. Ethan nodded, understanding more than he let on. He'd spent years in the Navy SEALs, sacrificing time with family for the greater good. He knew the weight of duty and the toll it took on those left behind. Must be tough, Ethan said, his tone careful. Caleb shrugged. I guess. I just wish he was around more. He doesn't even know I like photography. He's always telling me to be careful, but he doesn't really see me, you know. Ethan's grip tightened on the steering wheel. The boy's words struck a chord. He'd seen too many families fractured by careers that demanded everything. He thought of his own past, the missions that had consumed him, the friendships he'd lost, the life he was still trying to piece back together. The truck hit a patch of gravel and Ethan slowed down. What about your mom? He asked cautiously. She passed away a few years ago, Caleb said, his voice dropping. It's just me and Dad now. Ethan's chest tightened. He glanced at the boy, whose gaze was fixed out the window. There was a quiet resilience in Caleb, but also a loneliness that felt all too familiar. As they pulled into the parking lot of a small diner, Ethan decided they both needed a break. He parked the truck and motioned toward the building. Let's grab something to eat. My treat. Inside, the diner buzzed with soft chatter and the clatter of dishes. Ethan ordered 2 burgers and sat across from Caleb in a booth. The boy's nervous energy began to ease as he took in the comforting surroundings. Can I ask you something? Caleb said after a few bites. Sure, Ethan replied, wiping his hands on a napkin. How did you know what to do back there? With the wolf? Ethan leaned back, considering his words. I used to be in the Navy SEALs. We trained for all kinds of situations. You learn to stay calm, think fast, and act when it matters. Caleb's eyes widened. A Navy SEAL? That's so cool. Did you ever do secret missions? Ethan chuckled softly. Something like that. But it's not as glamorous as it sounds. It's dangerous, and you don't always come back the same. The boy studied him, his curiosity evident. Is that why you're out here? In the woods? Partly, Ethan admitted. After I left the military, I needed some peace. The forest helps me clear my head. You know? Caleb nodded, his expression thoughtful. Do you miss it? Being a SEAL? Ethan hesitated. Sometimes. But I also missed a lot while I was away, family, friends. You can't get those moments back. Their conversation lulled as Caleb processed Ethan's words. He looked down at his camera, turning it over in his hands. Do you think my dad feels like that? Caleb asked quietly. Ethan met his gaze, sensing the weight of the question. I think your dad loves you more than anything. He's just doing his best with what he knows. The boy nodded slowly, though uncertainty lingered in his eyes. Ethan reached across the table, tapping the camera. You should show him your photos sometime. Let him see what you love. Caleb smiled faintly. Maybe I will. Their meal finished, Ethan drove Caleb to the address the boy had given him. It was a modest house on a quiet street, the porch light glowing warmly. As they pulled into the driveway, Ethan spotted a dark SUV parked outside. That your dad? Ethan asked, nodding toward the car. Caleb's face lit up with a mix of surprise and apprehension. Yeah. He must have come home early. Ethan parked and turned to Caleb. Go ahead. I'll wait here until you're inside. Caleb opened the door but paused, looking back at Ethan. Thanks. For everything. Ethan smiled. Anytime, kid. Take care. As Caleb approached the house, the front door swung open, and a tall, imposing man stepped out. His sharp suit and piercing gaze left no doubt. This was Caleb's father. The man scanned the driveway, his eyes locking onto Ethan. Ethan felt a familiar tension ripple through him. This wasn't over, not yet. Marcus Davis stood in the doorway, his sharp features illuminated by the porch light. His tall frame radiated authority, the kind honed from years in the FBI. His piercing eyes scanned the driveway, landing on Caleb first, then shifting to Ethan in the truck. "Caleb," Marcus called, his voice firm. "Get inside." The boy hesitated, glancing back at Ethan. "Dad, wait." "Now," Marcus said, more forcefully this time. Caleb lowered his head and hurried inside. Marcus stepped down the porch stairs, his movements deliberate, his eyes fixed on Ethan. Ethan climbed out of the truck, meeting Marcus's gaze with calm composure, though he could feel the tension building. "Who are you?" Marcus demanded, his tone clipped. "Ethan Hayes," Ethan replied evenly. "Your son had a close call in the woods. I brought him home." Marcus's jaw tightened as he assessed Ethan, taking in his rugged appearance and calm demeanor. "A close call?" "A wolf," Ethan explained, his voice steady. "It cornered him on a trail. I stepped in." Marcus's eyes narrowed, his suspicion evident. "And why were you out there?" "Following him?" Ethan's expression hardened slightly, but he kept his tone measured. "I was jogging, heard the commotion and acted. That's it." Marcus took a step closer, his imposing presence almost palpable. "You expect me to believe that? My son just happens to run into a former SEAL in the middle of the woods? Sounds convenient." Ethan didn't flinch. "Believe what you want, Agent Davis. But the only reason Caleb's inside right now is because I was there." The words hung in the air, sharp and undeniable. Marcus studied Ethan for a long moment, his trained instincts wrestling with the conflicting emotions of fear, anger, and gratitude. Why was he out there alone? Marcus muttered, more to himself than Ethan. "He said he wanted to take pictures," Ethan offered, his tone softening slightly. "But he also mentioned you've been busy. Maybe he just wanted some space." Marcus bristled, but the remark hit its mark. He looked toward the house, a flicker of guilt crossing his face. "That's none of your business." "Maybe not," Ethan replied, "but it's his. He's a good kid. Brave too. You should see that." Marcus's jaw tightened again, but this time, the defensiveness gave way to something more vulnerable. He glanced back at the house, then sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. "You're a father, aren't you?" Ethan asked, sensing the shift. Marcus shook his head. "No. I mean, yes, of course I am. But it's complicated. My job." "It always is," Ethan interrupted gently. "Trust me, I know what it's like to choose duty over family. And I know the cost." Marcus's eyes flicked back to Ethan, his suspicion replaced by curiosity. "Navy SEAL, huh?" Ethan nodded. "Retired. Spent years thinking I was doing the right thing, only to realize I'd missed the most important moments back home." The weight of Ethan's words settled over Marcus, who exhaled deeply. "And now you're out here in the woods, playing rescuer to kids who don't listen." Ethan allowed a small smile. "Something like that. But Caleb's smart. He's just looking for connection." Marcus's shoulders slumped slightly, the rigid facade cracking. He looked toward the house again, his thoughts clearly with his son. "I didn't even know he liked photography." "He's good at it," Ethan said. "Maybe you should ask him to show you sometime." Marcus gave a faint nod, then extended his hand. "Thank you for what you did." Ethan shook it firmly. "Anytime." The front door creaked open, and Caleb peeked out, his face anxious. "Dad?" Marcus turned to his son, his expression softening. "It's okay, Caleb. Come here." Caleb hesitated, then stepped onto the porch. Marcus crouched slightly, meeting him at eye level. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I should have been here." Caleb blinked, surprised. "It's not your fault, Dad. I wanted to see the woods." Marcus nodded, placing a hand on his son's shoulder. "I know, but next time we go together. Deal?" A smile broke across Caleb's face. "Deal." Ethan watched the exchange from the truck, a sense of satisfaction settling over him. As father and son walked inside, Marcus glanced back at Ethan, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. Ethan climbed back into his truck, starting the engine. As he drove away, he couldn't help but feel that this wasn't the end of their story. It was just the beginning. The scent of freshly brewed coffee filled Marcus's kitchen as sunlight poured through the wide windows the next morning. Caleb sat at the table, his camera in hand, flipping through the images he'd taken before the wolf appeared. Marcus leaned against the counter, nursing a mug, his gaze resting on his son. "Those pictures any good?" Marcus asked, breaking the quiet. Caleb looked up, a flicker of surprise crossing his face. "Some of them, yeah. Want to see?" Marcus hesitated, then crossed the room and pulled out a chair beside Caleb. The boy handed over the camera, his fingers brushing against his father's. Marcus scrolled through the photos, his face softening as he saw the world through Caleb's lens. "These are great, Caleb," he said genuinely. "You've got an eye for detail." A smile broke across Caleb's face. "Thanks, Dad. I was thinking maybe I could take more. If it's okay." Marcus set the camera down, his gaze meeting Caleb's. "I think it's more than okay, but we'll figure out how to do it safely." Together, the word lingered between them, a promise neither of them wanted to break. Before they could say more, the sound of a car pulling into the driveway drew their attention. Marcus stood, peering through the window. "Looks like we've got company." Ethan's truck came to a stop, and the former SEAL stepped out, holding a small bag. He gave a polite wave as Marcus opened the door. "Morning," Ethan said, his tone casual but warm. "Ethan," Marcus greeted, stepping aside to let him in. "What brings you by?" Ethan held up the bag. "Figured Caleb might like this. It's a guidebook on local wildlife. Thought it might help with his photography." Caleb's eyes lit up as Ethan handed him the book. "Wow, this is awesome. Thanks, Ethan." Marcus observed the exchange, his respect for Ethan growing. "Coffee?" he offered. "Sure," Ethan replied, following Marcus into the kitchen. As Caleb dove into the book at the table, Marcus poured a cup and handed it to Ethan. The two men leaned against the counter, the air between them more relaxed than the night before. "I owe you an apology," Marcus began. "I was out of line last night. You saved my son, and I treated you like a suspect." Ethan shrugged, his expression understanding. "You were protecting your kid. I get it." "Still," Marcus said, his tone firm, "you didn't deserve that. And I appreciate what you did, for Caleb and for me. He's everything I've got." Ethan nodded, sensing the weight of Marcus's words. "He's a good kid. You're doing something right." For a moment, the two men shared a quiet understanding, their shared experiences bridging the gap between them. Caleb looked up from his book, a thought sparking in his mind. "Hey, Ethan, do you ever miss being a SEAL?" Ethan glanced at Marcus, then back at Caleb. "Sometimes. But I've learned there's more to life than what I left behind. You've got to find new ways to be useful to help people." "Like yesterday?" Caleb asked. "Exactly," Ethan said with a smile. "Helping you reminded me that there's always a way to make a difference." Caleb grinned, the bond between him and Ethan growing stronger with each word. Marcus watched the exchange, his chest tightening with gratitude. "I've got an idea," Marcus said suddenly, setting his mug down. "How about we all go out to the woods this weekend? Caleb can take pictures, and Ethan can show us some of those survival skills." Caleb's eyes widened with excitement. "Really? That would be amazing." Ethan raised an eyebrow at Marcus, surprised but pleased. "You sure you're ready to trade the suit for hiking boots?" Marcus chuckled. "I think I can manage. Besides, it's time I started spending more time with my son. And maybe I could learn a thing or two from you." Ethan smiled, his respect for Marcus deepening. "Sounds like a plan." As the morning wore on, the three of them shared stories and laughter, the tension from the night before dissolving into camaraderie. Caleb's photos, Marcus's determination, and Ethan's wisdom wove together into something new. A bond that none of them had expected but all of them welcomed. When Ethan finally left, the air was lighter, and the house felt more like a home. Marcus stood on the porch, watching the truck disappear down the road. Caleb stood beside him, his camera slung over his shoulder. "Dad," Caleb said softly, "thanks for listening. And for wanting to do this with me." Marcus placed a hand on his son's shoulder, his voice steady. "I'm proud of you, Caleb, and I'm going to do better. I promise." Together, they turned back toward the house, their steps in sync, their hearts lighter. Somewhere in the distance, the forest waited, no longer a place of fear but a place of connection and growth. Though their journey was just beginning, they knew they wouldn't face it alone.